Welcome, coin hunters and collectors. Today, we're taking a closer look at one of the most fascinating coins in American history, the Liberty Wheat Penny, better known as the Lincoln Wheat Cent. At first glance, it may look like nothing more than an old 1-cent coin, but these small copper pieces can carry an incredible history, and certain dates, mint marks, errors, and exceptionally preserved examples can become highly desirable to collectors. So before you toss an old wheat penny into a jar or spend it without a second thought, take a moment to examine it closely, because the smallest details can sometimes make the biggest difference. The Lincoln Wheat Cent was introduced in 1909 and became one of the most recognizable American coins of the 20th century. Its obverse features the famous portrait of Abraham Lincoln, while the reverse displays two wheat ears surrounding the words 1 cent and United States of America. That simple wheat design is the reason collectors affectionately call it the wheat penny. Millions were produced over the years, but not every example survived in good condition, and coins with unusual characteristics, scarce dates, strong original details, or significant minting mistakes can attract serious attention. The 1942 Liberty Wheat Penny is a small copper coin with a story far bigger than its 1-cent denomination, struck at the Denver Mint during a pivotal period when the United States was entering a dramatically transformed wartime economy. On the front, Abraham Lincoln's familiar portrait faces right, surrounded by the inscriptions Liberty and In God We Trust, while the reverse carries the famous wheat ears that gave the series its enduring nickname. The tiny D mint mark beneath the date identifies Denver as the place of manufacture, and that single letter can make this otherwise familiar-looking penny especially interesting to collectors. Imagine holding a coin that passed through American commerce more than 8 decades ago, perhaps in a grocery store drawer, a cash register, a pocket, or an old family collection, while the nation was mobilizing for World War II. Most 1942 cents are not rare treasures, but the most intriguing examples are the ones that combine exceptional preservation, unusual striking characteristics, or legitimate varieties that separate them from ordinary pieces. That is where the story begins, because with an old wheat cent, the difference between a common survivor and a remarkable discovery can sometimes be hiding in details so small that they disappear at first glance. The year 1942 places this penny in one of the most fascinating chapters of American coinage history. The Denver Mint was producing enormous quantities of cents to satisfy everyday commerce, and the nation's demand for coins was growing as factories expanded, and millions of Americans entered a rapidly changing wartime economy. The familiar bronze appearance of the 1942 cent reflects the traditional copper-based composition used for Lincoln cents before the famous 1943 steel cent experiment. That makes the color of an authentic example especially interesting today, because decades of handling, storage, oxidation, cleaning, and environmental exposure can dramatically change its appearance. A naturally preserved piece may display warm reddish-brown or coppery tones, while circulated examples can become darker and more subdued. Collectors pay close attention to the original surface, because cleaning can destroy the very qualities that make an old coin desirable. Under magnification, the Lincoln portrait can reveal tiny contact marks, hairline scratches, flattened areas, and subtle evidence of how strongly the dies struck the planchet. On the reverse, the wheat ears, lettering, and denomination provide another field of clues. What looks like ordinary wear from a distance can become a fascinating record of the coin's journey when viewed closely. Now the real hunt begins, because collectors know that the date and mint mark are only the opening chapter. A 1942 wheat penny should be examined for genuine varieties, unusual die characteristics, striking anomalies, and exceptional preservation, rather than assuming that every unusual-looking mark is a valuable error. Doubling deserves particular attention, but true double die characteristics are created during the die-making process, and should not be confused with ordinary machine doubling, scratches, or damage that occurred after the coin left the mint. The alignment of Lincoln's portrait, the date, the mint mark, and the reverse lettering can also be studied under magnification, while the rim should be inspected for signs of an unusual strike, abnormal spreading, flattening, or damage. A coin with a strange-looking edge may immediately attract attention, but an unusual appearance is not automatically evidence of a mint error. Even the planchet itself can tell a story. Unexpected weight, thickness, color, or surface characteristics may justify further investigation. That is why serious collectors resist the temptation to declare a fortune from a photograph or a quick glance. They document what they see, compare it with known references, use accurate measurements, and when something genuinely unusual appears, seek professional authentication. And then there is the condition factor, perhaps the most dramatic part of the entire 1942 Wheat Penny story. Two coins with exactly the same date and mint mark can have radically different collector appeal because their surfaces may have lived completely different lives. One could have spent decades circulating through countless hands, accumulating scratches, discoloration, and wear, while another may have been placed into a collection shortly after leaving the mint and preserved with remarkably sharp details. Look carefully at Lincoln's cheek and jaw, the hair above his ear, the lettering, and the wheat stalks. Are the design elements crisp, or have years of friction softened them? Are the original surfaces still present, or does the coin show evidence of polishing or harsh cleaning? Is there attractive original color, and are there distracting stains or spots? These questions become increasingly important as condition rises. A truly exceptional specimen can transform a familiar old cent into a serious collector piece, because high-grade survivors are not simply old, they are old and unusually well preserved. That distinction is what can turn an ordinary-looking coin hunt into a moment of genuine suspense, especially when someone discovers a forgotten wheat cent that has escaped decades of damage. When collectors discuss potential value, it is important to separate excitement from verified market reality. For this 1942 Wheat Penny, the amounts we are using here are an illustrative storytelling ladder, not guaranteed prices, and not a claim that an ordinary example is worth thousands of dollars. A coin with a minor but legitimate variation might enter a hypothetical discussion around $2,500 to $3,500, while a more notable and properly authenticated example could, in this fictional ladder, reach around $9,000. A high-grade coin might be discussed around $5,000, an unusual mint anomaly around $6,000, and a particularly rare collector piece around $7,500. An exceptionally preserved or uncommon example could be imagined around $8,000, while an unusual discovery with strong collector demand could approach $8,500. At the very top of this illustrative ladder, an extraordinary or historically significant example could be discussed at up to $9,000. These figures are deliberately presented as hypothetical outcomes for storytelling, not promises, appraisals, or guaranteed selling prices. Actual value depends on the precise variety, authenticity, grade, eye appeal, certification, rarity, and what collectors are willing to pay at a particular time. In other words, the difference between a 1-cent coin and a potentially valuable collectible is not imagination alone. It is evidence. Think about what a genuine discovery could mean emotionally. Finding an extraordinary 1942 Wheat Penny in an inherited collection could feel like discovering a forgotten piece of family history, while finding an authenticated rarity in a box of old coins could resemble a sudden windfall. In an extreme hypothetical scenario, a valuable discovery might represent money comparable to a down payment on a home, but that possibility should never encourage anyone to assume that every old wheat penny is secretly worth a fortune. The responsible approach is much more exciting because it turns the search into a detective story. Start with the date and mint mark, then inspect the coin under good lighting without cleaning it. Compare the color and surface texture with known examples. Check the rim carefully, examine the strike alignment, and look for possible doubling in the date and lettering. Use a precise scale to check weight, remembering that environmental damage, corrosion, dirt, and measurement limitations can affect what you see. If the weight, composition, shape, or striking characteristics seem genuinely unusual, preserve the coin exactly as found and consult a reputable numismatist or professional grading and authentication service. Never scrape, polish, chemically clean, or alter the surface in an attempt to reveal hidden value, because an irreversible cleaning can reduce collector appeal rather than increase it. The most captivating thing about the 1942 Liberty Wheat Penny is not simply the possibility of money. It is the possibility that a tiny piece of copper can carry an entire chapter of American history in the palm of your hand. Every surviving example has endured decades of changing technology, generations of collectors, economic transformations, and countless ordinary moments that nobody recorded. Most will remain affordable historical collectibles, but a truly unusual specimen can become far more interesting when rarity, condition, variety, and authenticity come together. That is why the next time an old wheat penny appears in a jar, inherited box, flea market collection, or forgotten drawer, do not dismiss it simply because it looks worn. Turn it over, find the date, check the mint mark, study the surfaces, and ask what the coin might be telling you. The smallest clues, the edge of a rim, the shape of a letter, the alignment of a strike, an unexpected weight, or a strangely preserved surface, can completely change the direction of the investigation. And sometimes the most astonishing discoveries begin with nothing more than someone deciding to look twice at a coin everyone else had already ignored. So before you move on from the 1942 Wheat Penny, remember this. The treasure is never guaranteed, the dramatic numbers are only illustrative, and professional authentication is essential before assigning serious value to any unusual coin. Yet that uncertainty is exactly what makes the hunt so addictive. Somewhere among ordinary collections and forgotten containers, there may be coins whose stories have remained hidden for generations, waiting for someone patient enough to notice the details. The 1942 may look like just another old 1-cent coin, but under magnification it becomes a mystery of metal, machinery, history, preservation, and human curiosity. Was this particular penny simply another survivor of wartime America, or could its surfaces contain a legitimate variety or striking characteristic that makes collectors stop and take a second look? That question is still hanging in the air, and the answer may be hiding on a coin sitting somewhere right now, unnoticed. And if you think this 1942 wheat penny is fascinating, wait until you see the next shocking coin, because the next discovery could take this treasure hunt into an entirely different level of rarity. The Liberty Wheat Penny 1-cent coin from 1951 is a small piece of American history that can look almost ordinary at first glance. Yet its story begins in a remarkable period when the United States was changing rapidly after World War II, and the Denver Mint was producing millions of Lincoln wheat cents for everyday commerce. Struck in Denver and carrying the small D mint mark beneath the date, the 1951 wheat cent features Victor David Brenner's familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, with liberty beside his head and in God we trust above him, while the reverse displays the 2 wheat ears that gave the entire series its enduring nickname. Made primarily of copper, the coin has the warm reddish-brown, or sometimes deeper chocolate appearance that develops naturally as the metal ages, and that color can tell part of its story. But the real fascination begins when you realize that millions of these pennies disappeared into pockets, cash registers, jars, drawers, and old collections decades ago, meaning some examples may have survived in remarkably different conditions from the average worn coin. A 1951D is not automatically rare simply because it is old, and that distinction matters, because its value depends heavily on condition, originality, strike quality, color designation, and whether a genuine mint-made variety or error is present. Imagine finding one of these pennies buried beneath a pile of ordinary change, its date partly hidden beneath years of grime, while the tiny D, beneath 1951, quietly reveals where it was made. You might turn it over and see the familiar wheat stalks, perhaps worn nearly smooth on a heavily circulated example, or perhaps surprisingly sharp on a coin that spent much of its life protected from contact. Look closely around Lincoln's cheek, jaw, hair, and coat, because high points such as these tend to reveal where first, while the wheat ears and lettering on the reverse can show whether the coin retained strong detail. The rim deserves attention too. A healthy original rim should appear properly formed rather than strangely flattened, uneven, or damaged. Under good lighting, the surface may reveal tiny marks from circulation, darker areas from oxidation, or brighter reddish portions that survived with more original copper color. That color difference can become especially important to collectors, because an original red 1951D can be much more desirable than a similarly graded brown example. Yet collectors must be careful, because artificially brightened or chemically altered copper can sometimes look suspiciously attractive. The goal is not simply to find the shiniest penny, but to determine whether the coin's surfaces, color, strike, and overall appearance are naturally preserved. Now the mystery becomes more exciting when you begin searching for unusual characteristics rather than simply staring at the date. Examine the lettering around Liberty and In God We Trust, the digits of the date, and the reverse inscriptions for signs that might suggest doubling. But remember that true doubled dies are created during the die-making process and are different from ordinary machine doubling or damage caused after the coin left the mint. Check the spaces around the letters and numerals for shapes that repeat in a consistent direction, and inspect the wheat ears for unusual features that deserve closer study. Strike alignment can also provide clues. Compare the orientation of the obverse and reverse, while remembering that minor variations do not automatically make a coin rare or valuable. The edge and rim should also be examined for abnormal thickness, missing metal, unusual distortion, or evidence of later damage. If you have a precise digital scale, weight can be another useful screening tool, but a difference from the expected standard does not automatically prove an error, because dirt, where environmental damage or scale accuracy can affect measurements. The responsible approach is to record what you see rather than immediately declaring a discovery, because the difference between an interesting penny and a genuinely important mint error can require expert attribution. And this is where the 1951D wheat cent becomes more than a nostalgic old penny. Its collector appeal comes from the combination of age, design, historical context, condition, and the possibility of finding an unusually preserved or genuinely unusual example. Picture an original coin with crisp Lincoln details, strong wheat lines, clean lettering, and attractive natural color surviving for more than 7 decades with surprisingly little contact. That kind of preservation can make collectors stop and look twice. Then imagine a coin showing a legitimate and significant mint-made anomaly that can be documented and authenticated. Suddenly, the ordinary penny becomes a question mark, and question marks are powerful in collecting because they invite investigation. But there is an important reality behind the excitement. Most 1951D cents are not worth thousands of dollars. Their values vary widely, and common circulated pieces may be worth only a modest amount above face value, while genuinely scarce varieties, major errors, or exceptional certified examples can command substantially more. That is why the smartest collector does not begin with a price tag. They begin with identification, condition, comparison, and evidence. If you are wondering how high the story could climb, Think of the following figures as an illustrative storytelling ladder rather than promises of what any particular 1951 D penny will sell for. A minor but interesting variation might be imagined in the $2,500 to $3,500 range if it were truly rare, authenticated, and supported by strong market demand. A more notable and legitimate example could be discussed around $9,000 in an exceptional hypothetical scenario. A high-grade coin might be imagined around $5,000, while an unusual authenticated mint anomaly could enter a hypothetical $6,000 level, and a rare collector piece might be discussed around $7,500. An exceptionally preserved or genuinely uncommon specimen could be imagined around $8,000, while an unusual discovery with strong collector demand might reach a hypothetical $8,500. In an extraordinary or historically significant scenario, the storytelling ceiling could approach $9,000. These numbers are illustrative only, never guaranteed valuations, and they should never be interpreted as standard prices for ordinary 1951 D wheat cents. A coin reaching such levels would need compelling evidence, exceptional characteristics, strong condition, and credible authentication. In other words, finding a penny that could theoretically represent the equivalent of a down payment on a home or an unexpected financial windfall is exciting. But believing every old penny is worth that much is exactly the kind of mistake experienced collectors avoid. Before allowing your imagination to run away with the possibility of a once-in-a-lifetime discovery, slow down and examine the coin responsibly. Weigh it using a reliable scale and compare the result with the appropriate specifications, but treat weight only as one clue. Study the metal color under neutral lighting and look for natural copper toning rather than assuming a bright surface means a valuable red coin. Rotate the penny and inspect the strike alignment, checking whether the designs appear properly centered and whether any unusual positioning is consistent with a legitimate minting problem rather than damage. Study the rim from several angles, searching for unusual broadening, flattening, missing sections, or other characteristics that might justify closer examination. Then magnify the lettering and date, looking carefully for possible doubling, especially around the edges of characters, while remembering that scratches, dye deterioration, and mechanical doubling can create deceptive shapes. Avoid cleaning, polishing, scraping, or applying chemicals to the coin, because an attempt to improve its appearance can permanently reduce collector appeal. If something genuinely unusual appears, photograph both sides clearly, preserve the coin safely, compare it with reputable references, and seek professional authentication from a recognized grading or authentication service before making any major claim about rarity or value. There is something deeply compelling about the 1951 D wheat penny because its greatest secret may not be visible from across the room. It may be hidden in the tiny details that survived while the coin traveled through an America that now exists only in photographs and memories. Every scratch can represent decades of circulation, every surviving sharp detail can hint at careful preservation, and every unusual feature can raise a new question about what happened inside the Denver Mint when the coin was struck. Perhaps your example is ordinary, and that is perfectly fine because even an ordinary wheat cent is a tangible connection to American history. But perhaps, tucked inside an old jar, inherited collection, forgotten drawer, or handful of change, there is a coin whose condition or unusual characteristic deserves a second look. The suspense is not that every 1951 D penny is secretly a fortune. The suspense is that you cannot know what you have until you examine it carefully. And just when you think the search is over, another coin can appear with a different date, a different mint mark, and a far more astonishing story. So keep looking, because the next shocking discovery may be hiding in the most ordinary place imaginable, and the tiny coin you almost ignored could be the clue that leads you straight to it. The 1955 D Liberty Wheat Penny, The 1-cent coin struck at the Denver Mint may look like nothing more than an old copper coin that has spent decades forgotten in a jar, drawer, pocket, or box of inherited change. But its real story begins with the era in which it was made. On the front, Abraham Lincoln's familiar portrait dominates the design, surrounded by Liberty and the date 1955, while the small D mint mark beneath the date identifies Denver as its birthplace. On the reverse, the familiar wheat ears frame 1 cent and United States of America, creating the unmistakable appearance that has made wheat cents so beloved among collectors. By 1955, the Lincoln wheat cent was approaching the end of its long run, which began in 1909 and would soon give way to the Lincoln Memorial Reverse in 1959, meaning this particular year sits near the closing chapter of one of America's most recognizable coin designs. Millions of 1955 D cents were produced, so this is not automatically a rare coin simply because it carries the 1955 date, and that distinction is extremely important. The excitement comes from what might make one individual example different from another. Condition, strike quality, surface preservation, die characteristics, unusual mint-made errors, and legitimate varieties can dramatically change collector interest. Imagine finding one mixed among ordinary pennies and realizing that the coin itself is nearly 70 years old, carrying traces of an America that existed long before smartphones, online banking, and digital payments transformed everyday life. That tiny copper-colored disc is not just money anymore. It is a physical survivor from a vanished chapter of American history. The Denver Mint was producing enormous quantities of cents during this period because the humble 1-cent coin was essential to everyday commerce, moving through grocery stores, cash registers, vending machines, pockets, and countless transactions across the country. A 1955 D cent, therefore, represents an ordinary object from an extraordinary period, when post-war America was expanding rapidly, and the wheat cent was still a familiar part of daily life. Its copper composition gives a properly preserved example a warm reddish-brown appearance, although decades of circulation can turn the surfaces darker brown, duller, scratched, stained, or unevenly toned. Under strong magnification, collectors may notice tiny die characteristics, contact marks, polishing lines, planchet irregularities, or differences in the sharpness of Lincoln's hair, coat, and facial features. On the reverse, the wheat stalks and lettering provide another opportunity to judge how strongly the coin was struck and how much wear has accumulated over the years. The small Denver D is especially important because it separates this coin from Philadelphia issues of the same year, which normally carry no mint mark. But there is another reason the 1955 date can instantly attract attention. The famous 1955 double die obverse is one of the most celebrated Lincoln cent varieties in American numismatics. Yet collectors must be careful not to confuse that famous Philadelphia variety with an ordinary 1955 D cent. A coin showing random-looking doubling, machine doubling, damage, or distorted lettering is not automatically the legendary 1955 double die. Authenticating the exact variety requires careful study, and that is where a simple old penny can suddenly become a serious numismatic investigation. Now picture the moment you discover a 1955 D wheat cent in an inherited collection, and the coin appears unusually sharp, bright, and well-preserved compared with everything around it. You turn it under a lamp and begin examining the date, the D mint mark, Lincoln's portrait, the rim, and the wheat reverse, wondering whether the coin has survived with enough original detail to interest a specialist. This is where condition becomes the great divider. A heavily circulated example with flattened wheat ears, worn lettering, scratches, and dark surfaces may remain a modest collectible, while a much cleaner coin with strong detail, attractive color, minimal marks, and excellent overall preservation can command considerably more attention. Collectors often examine the difference between brown, red-brown, and red surfaces, because original color and preservation can influence desirability, particularly at high grades. Yet shiny does not automatically mean valuable. A coin that has been cleaned or artificially polished may actually lose collector appeal because its original surfaces have been disturbed. The rim deserves attention too. A normal rim should have a consistent shape, while a genuine striking problem might produce an unusual appearance that deserves further investigation. The key is patience. Do not scrape the coin, polish it, rub it with chemicals, or attempt a homemade restoration. A potentially interesting wheat cent should be preserved exactly as found, because its original surface can contain evidence that helps specialists determine what happened during its journey from the mint to the present day. And then there are the possibilities that make collectors lean closer to the magnifying glass: genuine mint errors and unusual varieties. A wheat cent can potentially show characteristics associated with problems involving the planchet, dies, striking process, or alignment, but every unusual mark needs to be separated from ordinary damage caused after the coin left the mint. A broad strike, off-center strike, clipped planchet, die crack, die clash, or other legitimate mint-made feature can be interesting, while scratches, dents, environmental corrosion, or post-mint alteration are entirely different matters. Letter doubling is another area where excitement can quickly turn into confusion. If the letters in Liberty, the date, or United States of America appear to have extra outlines or secondary impressions, do not immediately declare the coin a famous doubled die. True doubled dies result from a specific die-making error and have recognizable characteristics, whereas mechanical or machine doubling can create flatter, shelf-like distortions that are generally much less desirable. This is why magnification alone is not enough. Compare the shape, position, and style of the suspected doubling with documented references, and if the feature still appears convincing, seek an experienced numismatist or professional grading and authentication service. The difference between a damaged penny and a genuine mint error can be enormous, but the difference can only be trusted when the evidence is real. That uncertainty is exactly what makes the hunt so addictive. Every ordinary-looking coin becomes a question waiting to be answered. Now comes the part that makes people check old jars twice: the possibility of serious collector value. It is important to be completely clear that the following figures are illustrative storytelling examples. Not guaranteed prices for a 1955 D wheat cent. An actual value depends heavily on authentication, grade, color designation, rarity, error attribution, eye appeal, provenance, and current market demand. In a hypothetical collecting ladder, a coin with a minor but legitimate variation might fall into a $2,500 to $3,500 outcome, while a substantially more notable and authenticated example could be imagined around $9,000. A truly high-grade coin could be discussed around $5,000 in this illustrative scenario, while an unusual mint anomaly might reach a hypothetical $6,000 level if specialists confirmed that it was genuinely significant. A rare collector piece could be imagined around $7,500, an exceptionally preserved or uncommon example around $8,000, and an unusual find attracting especially strong collector demand around $8,500. At the extreme end of this storytelling ladder, an extraordinary or historically significant example could be described as approaching $9,000, but none of these numbers should be interpreted as a promise that a 1955 D penny is worth that amount. In the real market, many 1955 D wheat cents are worth far less, and the overwhelming majority will not approach these dramatic figures. The lesson is not that every old penny is a hidden fortune. The lesson is that genuine rarity, exceptional preservation, and authenticated mint characteristics are what can transform an ordinary denomination into a remarkable collectible. Think about what a genuine high-value discovery could mean emotionally. Finding a truly extraordinary coin in an old family collection could feel like opening a forgotten box and discovering a sudden windfall, perhaps even money that could contribute toward a down payment on a home or change the way you think about an inherited collection. But the most powerful part of the story is not the dollar figure. It is the realization that something people once spent without a second thought can survive for generations and eventually become a piece of history worth protecting. A 1955 wheat cent might have passed through the hands of a factory worker, a shopkeeper, a child saving coins in a jar, or a family making an ordinary purchase in an America that looked completely different from today. Its scratches may record circulation, its tunning may reflect decades of storage, and its worn wheat stalks may show just how many transactions it survived. That is why collectors often become emotionally attached to these coins. They connect the present with a physical object that was actually there. And if your example happens to display an authentic error, exceptional grade, or documented variety, the story becomes even more fascinating because you are no longer looking at merely an old cent. You are looking at an unusual survivor of the minting process. Still, resist the temptation to assume the biggest number you see online applies to your coin. Auction results can involve exceptional specimens, certified varieties, or completely different dates and mint marks, and confusing those examples can create wildly unrealistic expectations. So if you think you have a 1955 wheat cent worth investigating, begin responsibly. Hold the coin by its edges and examine it under good lighting without cleaning it. Check the date and confirm the small D mint mark beneath it. Look closely at the metal color, but remember that surface color alone does not prove rarity. Copper coins can naturally develop different shades depending on storage and environmental exposure. Examine the strike alignment by looking at how the designs and lettering sit relative to the coin's edges. Inspect the rim for unusual characteristics, and use magnification to study possible doubling, without assuming every extra line is a valuable variety. Compare the weight against the standard specifications using an accurate scale, because a meaningful weight difference can sometimes point toward a planchet problem, although scale readings can also be affected by wear, dirt, damage, or inaccurate equipment. Never drill, bend, scratch, scrape, polish, or chemically clean the coin to test it. If something genuinely unusual appears, photograph both sides, record the weight and measurements, and seek an independent professional opinion from a reputable numismatist or recognized grading and authentication service. Professional authentication is especially important before accepting dramatic claims about rarity or value, because the coin market contains plenty of misunderstandings and exaggerated online valuations. The smartest collector is not the person who believes every exciting claim. It is the person who knows how to investigate one carefully. And that leaves us with the mystery that makes the 1955 Liberty Wheat Penny so compelling. How many unusual coins are still hiding in plain sight? Somewhere, an old coffee can may contain pennies that have not been examined in decades. A forgotten collection may be sitting inside a family drawer, or a box of inherited coins may hold a specimen whose importance has never been recognized. Most 1955 wheat cents will not turn into life-changing treasures, but one carefully preserved coin with a legitimate mint-made characteristic can make an ordinary search suddenly unforgettable. The real thrill is not simply chasing a huge price tag. It is learning to recognize the difference between ordinary wear and genuine evidence, between damage and a mint error, between wishful thinking and professional authentication. So the next time a 1955 wheat cent crosses your path, slow down before spending it, because its age alone makes it worth a second look, and its condition, variety, or mint-made peculiarity could make the investigation even more interesting. The question is not whether every old penny is secretly worth a fortune. The question is whether you can spot the one that truly deserves a closer examination. And just when you think you have seen everything a wheat cent can reveal, the next coin may be hiding an even more shocking story, one that could make this 1955 discovery look like only the beginning.